It's 1:10 a.m. Do you know where your president is? He's tweeting with the caps lock key on.
Trump is tweeting about the violence in Minneapolis.
Not even Fox News is safe from President Donald Trump's Twitter attack.
The president spent the weekend on an unhinged Twitter rant.
Today, President Trump is taking on Fox News.
Just reported the news about the president tweeting tonight.
That Donald Trump's Twitter account employs a conversational communicative style, and this kind of varies between a more informal kind of style and a more formal style.
On any given day, President Donald Trump will tweet or retweet dozens or even hundreds of things.
So before Trump was elected as president, he had to essentially gain the support of those around him, especially the Republicans. And he did this through his social media accounts, and which included a large majority of his Twitter accounts and tweets. All of these tweets are all very crucial for Donald Trump, as it brings up modern politics in language that the middle to lower class can understand. Some of these ironic tweets may come back to haunt him, but they're all examples of a political figure using his social media language to interact with his supporters. So what does Lebov say on Donald Trump's pre-presidential speeches? So one of Lebov's quotes states, "Our work in the speech community making it painfully obvious that in many ways working class speakers who temporize qualify reasoners and debaters, that many middle class speakers who temporize qualify lose to their argument in massive irrelevant speakers." So Donald Trump's supporters are mostly those in the working class and not the middle class. They are those who, don't really live in the cities, but rather live in the smaller counties. And then Lebov also says, but the average middle class speaker that we encounter makes no such effort. He is enmeshed in verbiage, the victim of sociolinguistic factors beyond his control. So Donald Trump's language appeals more to the working class, which consequently creates more support for him among voters. Because of this, Donald Trump's use of Twitter is strategic, as it broadcasts his thoughts in a way that anyone with a phone can do the same and listen to him. He's in essence creating a sort of he's creating his own voter agreement. People are agreeing with him in a way because he's using a social media platform in a way that any one of his supporters can use it as well. So sort of an analysis of Trump's Twitter and his accounts. If you look to the left, you'll see the schematics of Trump's tweets and how it's occurred and how many tweets he's used since I guess he started in 2009. And as you can really see, it sort of spiked up in 2012, way before he was even considering to run as a president. And because of that, increase of usage, he was also increased the followers, and that really helped him, I guess, gain control of the presidential election. And it really helped him in the long run because now people were paying attention more towards his social media platforms, and that was just more of a way to get his message across. And as you can see in the right, as I mentioned before, language is super important in the way of Twitter and in the way of what Trump says, because if you look at, those are all of the counties that voted in the 2016 presidential election, and the obvious blue spots are just big cities, places that are have a large population of people. But the rest of the red area are all very small counties that are surrounded by the working class. So it's super important that Trump uses language in a way that the working class to middle class are able to understand, and to a way that sort of reflects that, in a way that the working class can sort of, I guess, have the same ideals as him as well.
Over the past 4 years, Twitter has been overrun with jokes and memes that make fun of Donald Trump. Some of my favorites were tweeted in response to the news that Trump had contracted the coronavirus in October. These tweets make jokes about Trump being a different species, drinking bleach to cure himself, and overall how the entire Twitter community is laughing at him. We can analyze the jokes made about Trump during his presidency by applying De Leon's analysis of jokes from Land of the Open Graves. The Twitter community uses jokes as their weapons of the week to subtly show resistance towards the president, who seems like an untouchable authority figure. The tweets highlight how fearful and vulnerable people are of contracting the virus, and that Trump's downplay of it is not just irresponsible, but very dangerous. People don't actually think that the coronavirus is funny, but rather their jokes function to show their criticism of Trump and his poor leadership throughout the pandemic. Their tweets emphasize the irony that Trump spent months downplaying the virus, even calling it a hoax, and then contracted it himself. And the fact that this humor is so widespread across the entire Twitter community also helps them stay positive and hopeful about surviving the pandemic, despite their failed leadership. Like the rest of America, Trump was also very active on Twitter during his presidency. In a series of tweets from July, Trump tells 4 American non-white congresswomen to go back to their totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came, despite the fact that they are all US citizens and work for the same government he does. The tweet on the right is a response from a congressman who is also an immigrant, but happens to be a white male. Trump's tweets reveal racist assumptions he's made about the congresswomen, implying that they are not as American as him because they are not white US citizens. We can use Dubois to analyze how Trump's tweets create and perpetuate division between white and non-white races. Similar to how Harvard used their platform to maintain the idea that there are undeniable differences between the whites and the lower races while Dubois attended, here Trump is using Twitter to promote the idea that non-white congresspeople are inherently inferior to white government officials such as himself. And since race cannot be conceptualized by science or reason, defining it depends on whoever's speaking. Dubois discusses various moments throughout his ancestry when his racial identity was altered depending on who was talking, and found it to be mostly based on visual appearance than anything concrete. When we look at Brendan Boyle's response to Trump, we can see how Trump made judgments based off of the congresswoman's non-white appearance, completely ignoring the fact that they are loyal US citizens like himself, or even immigrants like Boyle. Promoting these baseless racial distinctions helps Trump preserve his socioeconomic status as a dominant white male, in the same way that America treated Black people following the Civil War. Furthermore, since race is a fluid social fact that can be changed without reason, people conceptualize it in a way that aids their position in society.
Trump uses Twitter to speak directly to the common American over his 4 years as president, especially during the 2020 election. In many ways, his tweets were able to hurt and help his campaign. In his tweets, he used jokes that allowed for some of the things he said as president that may be unacceptable or rude have the ability to be seen as acceptable because of its joking nature. He also uses his role as president to try and apply a different type of power dynamic in his use of Twitter. We can analyze Trump's tweets in relation to Ye in his use of jokes. Both Trump and Ye use jokes to present a lighthearted nature. Ye shows us when the Mexican citizens tried to enter the US border and banter with the border police in a joking manner. The same is done when Trump refers to his candidates, such as calling Joe Biden Sleepy Joe. This is a way of making fun of another person, but making it acceptable due to its lighthearted nature and conversational manner of his comments. We can also analyze Trump's tweets in relation to Holmes and his understanding of power dynamics and structural vulnerability in the United States. Holmes explains structural vulnerability as a person's likelihood to encounter hardships in respect, health, and financial security due to the power dynamics in American society. Therefore, Trump tries to say he combats these power dynamics, explained in Holmes' article, by speaking to the common American in his tweets. In June, he explains he has done more for the Black community than any president by creating programs such as the Opportunity Zone, school choice, creating the lowest Black unemployment, and more. Therefore, he is trying to show Americans in his tweets that he is combating the power dynamics and those that may be structurally vulnerable, and in turn show them that they should vote for him in the 2020 election. However, as shown in the replies, there are differing opinions on what he says.
Even after the 2020 election, Trump's use of Twitter has been criticized for being destructive to his stated political goals and objectives. Through his tweets, we are able to analyze his articulation of polarizing language and his proposals for combating the COVID-19 pandemic. During the post-election period, Trump's linguistic and analytical tactics create lasting effects on individuals and the way they make sense of the world. When Trump refers to any media criticism, he utilizes new techniques of common leader communication as he labels media outlets with phrases including fake news and fraud. Traditional methods of leader communication characterize the effective methods that leaders use when they are trying to persuade their audience in a powerful way. Trump's Twitter has flipped normal approaches of leader communication through his polarizing language and phrasing. Davis's concepts of Chickasaw naming practices in language sits in places relates to Trump's flipped leader communication tactics through Twitter. Similar to Trump's detachment from news outlets, Davis conveys that Chickasaw language separates the Chickasaw Nation externally from other tribes. In the Chickasaw Nation, the power of language is important as shown when specific linguistics introduce new visual and symbolic distinctions that create contrast with previous linguistic representations. The Chickasaw Nation assimilated their culture into society through passive techniques of naming that did not involve the government. Similarly, Trump complicated how traditional media pursues its agenda because Twitter allows the president to broadcast his viewpoints across the nation without having to be questioned by interviewers and media interrogators. The president draws attention away from the issue at hand and rather delineates how he himself feels and thus how his followers should feel. By doing so, Trump exemplifies his leadership through governing that rewards the loyalty of his followers. Language is articulated to frame specific media outlets, which in turn causes individuals to make sense of their world. In his response to COVID-19, President Trump does not seem to dwell on the 300,000 deaths of U.S. citizens. Instead, his tweets function to glorify American industries for the progress the country has made in response to the virus. When Trump describes the great power of the American government and scientists, he binds scientific innovations like the vaccine to American land. Similarly, in Regeneration, Love, Drugs, and the Reading of Hispano Inheritance by Garcia, heroin addiction within the Hispanic community binds blood to land. Trump's glorification of COVID-19 is related to Garcia's concepts of querencia, which is an endearing Hispano term that describes how people are linked together with their blood and their land. The deep bond infused in aspects of daily life for Hispanics and heroin addiction further emphasizes the bond that Trump establishes with the power of American institutions, despite the pain and loss that both addiction and COVID-19 bring. Despite the record-breaking deaths, Trump characterizes COVID-19 as an experience that promotes a sense of belonging for American individuals in relation to American soil. Although Americans' lives are at high risk, Trump continues to portray America as great. The president's response to the deadly virus has sparked anxiety and fear among American individuals, especially those who are at high risk of contracting the virus.